Good evening and welcome one and all who have joined us for this special webinar conducted by UPES. We are very glad that you could come and join us, and so many of you who have registered for this session. You are all welcome, and we are really happy and glad that you could come here. I'm sure you have read about today's topic and the speaker that we have today, and it's the passion as well as the love that you have for this field that has brought you here. So welcome. And we know that no matter what the situation we face, we talk about different types of lockdowns, the trials and the issues that we have right now going on, but we are going to continue to work on our passion and the things that we love. We're going to keep doing that. And that's one of our mottos that we have at UPES, and we always say learning never stops. And with that spirit in ourselves, we are gathered here all together. So that is the main purpose of this webinar. And we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Ed Van Cise, Flight Director from NASA, all the way from Texas. Mr. Ed, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. I'm really glad I could be here and get the chance to talk to everybody.
So before we begin, a grand welcome to Mr. Ed virtually to UPES. And I want to give a brief outline about our speaker today. I'm sure you have read about him and found out all the information that is possible. So Mr. Ed Van Cise, also having the call sign Carbon Flight, which we are definitely going to discuss later in the session, was selected as a NASA flight director in 2009. He's worked with the human spaceflight with the International Space Station since 1998, and he's been working with space station structures, mechanics, in-flight maintenance, to name a few. His experience includes not only direct command and control of the space, but also instruction to the astronauts and flight controllers. Mr. Ed is also the flight director for Boeing's CST-100 Starliner crew capsule, as well as a flight director to develop NASA's Lunar Gateway, which is going to be very interesting for us to know. Mr. Ed has a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan, and very good to know, he has accumulated 90 minutes of zero gravity at the NASA's reduced gravity aircraft. With this, of course, he has many honors and awards that are to his name. Just to name a few, he has been awarded the NASA Exceptional Leadership Medal, as well as the Exceptional Service Medal and the Outstanding Leadership Medal at NASA. He is also inducted in the Space Camp Hall of Fame, which is a great achievement for us. So I could keep continuing to speak about Mr. Ed, but I know you have come here all the way to listen to him, to learn about what are the space missions, the space flights that we have. I'm going to give you a quick outline for today's session. Very soon we will be hearing from Mr. Ed and his presentation, after which we would take up question and answers. We are very glad to have many questions that you have already posted during registration. As a moderator, what I will do is I'll compile a few of these questions, and the ones that have been asked with the most common theme, I'll put it across to Mr. Ed, and he will be glad to share his insights on those questions. And we will also share you a link at the end of the session, which has been given to us by Mr. Ed. It will contain additional information, some videos, a lot of additional things that you want to learn that you will have from this presentation. So we want you to continue learning. We want you to be inspired by this presentation, not just for an hour, but even throughout this time when you have the opportunity to learn about space flights or the missions everywhere. And also a shout out that I know some of you have not been able to register for this session, and if you have missed out, or if your friends or classmates have missed out, you can give a shout out to them and you can tell them we are actually live on Facebook. So you could go to the UPES Facebook page and watch us live right now. If some of your friends or classmates have missed this registration, learning never stops. If you have the passion, nothing can stop you. There's always access available. So please go ahead on Facebook page. You could always watch it on that. And we do have an advanced apology in case we have any network issues or connectivity problems. We will manage it as soon as possible and get back to you. And without any further delay, I give to you, Mr. Ed, all yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It is a great pleasure and honor to be able to join with you guys virtually, but I think it's this time frame in our world has shown us that we can adapt and take advantage of the technologies that we have. And I would argue that this opportunity to speak to so many of you at once probably wouldn't have come about if I were trying to be in a specific place physically and just talking to an audience in one location. So again, UPES, I appreciate the opportunity. And to all my friends in India, good evening from Houston, Texas, where it's just getting our day started. So good morning from Texas. So I'll go ahead and apologize up front. Again, technology is what it is sometimes. I do have a couple of videos I want to show you. They do both have audio. We think we got them working, but in case they don't, the video should be available to you in the link in the handout that was just described to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started and go from there. So the first thing I want to show you is a video, and this video is about 4 minutes long, and it kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about, and that is this unique vantage point that we actually have from our planet, of our planet from above Earth's atmosphere, and what the astronauts can see. And so this video is going to be it's all time-lapse photography, so it's all photos that the astronauts have taken from the International Space Station, stitched together to make a bunch of video clips, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, so I'm hopeful that the video worked. And if it didn't, that might have been a very frustrating 3.5 minutes sitting there with jerky pictures and bad audio. And I apologize for that if that was the case. Um, if if you weren't able to see it, like I said, it's worth going and looking at it on YouTube, and there's be a link will be provided. When I show that video in person, I like to talk about some of the things that you either saw or that you will see, and that's all the different views of Earth. And you can see things like lightning strikes, and you can realize how the Earth is a lot more connected as almost like an organism when you look at it from space, because you see a lightning strike that occurs where you live and you think that you've got this local thunderstorm that's happening. But when you look at that same storm from space and that vantage point, you see that that system spans for hundreds or thousands of kilometers, and a lightning strike in one area will actually trigger lightning that runs the entire length of that storm system. And you can see really how the planet is connected. And since we are a part of it, even and maybe even especially as we are in this really interesting and challenging time, it kind of helps us realize that even more so that we are connected in one part of this grand planet that we get to live on. And through the work that I do, I get to help put people up there in space to get that vantage point. So let me jump in and tell you just a little bit more about myself and how I got into this business. I'm originally from a town called Bay City in the state of Michigan, which is about 2,200 kilometers northeast of Houston, from where we are now here at the Johnson Space Center. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was lost during liftoff, about a minute and a half after launch. The fuel tank exploded, and we lost Challenger and her crew. And I was in the third grade in elementary school, where I was old enough to realize something important had happened, but young enough to not really be struck by the complete tragedy of it all. So it got me interested. As was mentioned, I was involved in space camp. I went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama twice. In my late elementary education, my early high school or secondary education years, and was honored to be inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2012. While I was a high school student in my third year of high school, I went and lived in Germany for a year as a foreign exchange student, which not only gave me the opportunity to learn the culture and the language, but to really be embedded in what it's like to live in another country. You really get to know that culture, learn the language. And that was a really important part of my development, it would turn out, because being involved in the International Space Station, you obviously need to have an understanding of different cultures and different ways of life. As far as education goes, like you heard, I graduated with an undergraduate degree of aerospace engineering in 2000. And while I was going to university, I was already working at NASA here in Houston as an intern, going back and forth between NASA and school to work in some different areas. An engineering area, that's the materials branch, and then some operations for the International Space Station starting in the summer of 1998. So technically, if you count my years of an intern, I've been working on the International Space Station before the first element of it launched. So quite a number of years of background there. In 2009, I was selected to be a flight director. And anything you know about human spaceflight, there's always a mission patch associated with it. And so there's in the upper left of the screen is the patch for my call sign, which is Carbon Flight. And then at the bottom are the different missions that I've been a part of. Some of them are space station expedition missions, like Expedition 28 and Expedition 41. Some of them have been cargo missions to the space station, like the Japanese HTV-4 and the SpaceX 9 cargo mission. And more recently, I've been involved in the Boeing Commercial Crew Program and launching Americans again from the United States with Boeing's Starliner. We had our first uncrewed test flight last December. And then in just the past few weeks, I've been assigned to be the lead flight director for the Gateway, which is one part of the overall Artemis program, which is not only taking people back to the surface of the moon, but then also putting people in the lunar vicinity for long duration periods of time. So a little bit about my call sign of Carbon Flight, just to explain the background on that. So every flight director, since flight director number 1, has had a call sign. They started with colors, so the first flight directors were red, white, blue, etc. But I'm flight director number 78, and you kind of run short on colors at that point. So we've moved on to also including periodic elements and constellations and virtues, like there's a Liberty flight and Galileo flight. And now we have 97, in the history of NASA, there have been 97 flight directors now. So for me, number 78, I chose Carbon Flight because that zero gravity opportunities that you heard about, I was leading a team to create single-walled carbon nanotubes in microgravity, which was a lot more challenging than we thought it would be. And it gave me a lot of opportunities to learn how to lead teams and lead projects. And leveraging off of that experience has really helped push me to the skills that I need to have as a flight director. So I wanted to pay tribute to that. Also, carbon is black, and so it pays tribute to our history with in the flight director office, to the original flight directors with their colors. And then when my team is under pressure, I expect them to be tough and competent. And carbon under pressure, of course, turns into diamond. And so I really wanted to utilize that as well as part of my my call sign. So let's talk a little bit about the International Space Station. It's been in orbit since 1998, and it's had humans on it since November of 2000. So anybody that was born after November 1st of 2000, which is pretty much all the young adults and children in the world, have lived in a time where there have always been at least 2 people off the planet for as long as they've been alive, which just is amazing. For me, growing up, people would come and go into space, but for most of the young people these days, people have always been in space, whether they realize it or not. Human beings are a spacefaring species. The space station started small, but it's really grown over the years of assembly. We finished assembly of it in the year 2011, and right now it's about the size of a football pitch, and you can see there that. It's from end zone to end zone. It's wingtip to wingtip. Each of those 8 large solar arrays is about the size of a basketball court. It weighs in at about 420,000 kilos with a volume of about 390 cubic meters, which is the size of a pretty large house. So there's lots of living space inside the space station. And normally we have a crew of 6 people. And it's really easy for all 6 people to be working all day long, and they could go all day without seeing anybody else if they wanted to. It's a solar-powered spacecraft. We have the capability to produce up to 84 kilowatts of power. We don't use all of that. We keep some reserve, but at the same time, that's about the power to power 40 homes, at least here in the United States. So that's a lot of power draw to keep everything running. We're flying at an average altitude of about 415, 420 kilometers, going 28,000 kilometers per hour. So what that means, 28,000 kilometers per hour is pretty hard to visualize, but it's about 8 kilometers per second. So every second you're moving 8 kilometers. So it takes you about 90 minutes to go around the Earth. And since we're talking engineering, we've got over 50 computers on board and doing tons and tons of research all the time, both inside and outside the space station, both human attended, a lot of biology and things like that, but then a lot of science is actually controlled from the ground. And for those that are interested in computers, across our various computers, we've got about 3 million lines of code running to keep things in orbit. Narrowing down a little bit on how mission control works, here in Houston is essentially the central hub of mission control, but there are 5 mission control centers around the world that run the space station. And I apologize if my dog's in the background. It's part of doing a virtual webinar. But all the different mission controls feed into mission control here in Houston and utilize our command and control center to get commands and telemetry to the space station. So Between all the control centers, we send about 17,000 commands per month to the space station to control everything from solar array pointing to life support systems to all those science experiments. And we also have mission control centers that are on the left side of the page, the X and the D and the HTVCC. So all those visiting vehicles or cargo vehicles all have their own mission control centers that interface with their parts of the space station. So what does mission control look like? Well, this is what Flight Control Room 1 looks like here in Houston, and this is where we fly the space station from. First thing to point out to you is on the far wall, there are a lot of patches on the wall, a lot of plaques. And that's because in every flight control room in Houston, we hang a plaque after a mission is completed. And that symbolizes all the work that our team put into getting that mission safe up and then safely back. And it's a real honor that one of the council positions gets selected to hang that plaque. This particular room that we're looking at has been in use since 1965, and it has supported the Apollo 7 mission, the Apollo-Soyuz test project, Skylab, Space Shuttle, and now Space Station. So there's a lot of history in our flight control rooms, and we certainly are honored to work in there, but then also leverage off of the experience that has been gained through all those years of flying humans in space. And that's why we call Mission Control a leadership laboratory, because we're taking young people, making them responsible for the lives of not only the hardware, but also the people in space, and developing leaders, not only for Johnson Space Center, not only for NASA as an agency, but really valuable leaders for the entire industry, regardless of the setting. So there are, as you saw, there are a lot of console positions in mission control where the flight controllers sit, and that's what you'll see on TV, and that's what we call the front room. Each of those areas specialize in one particular part of the spacecraft or the mission, and it could be a thermal system, a life support system, the crew timeline, where things are stored, especially on the space station. It's really, there's just lots and lots of stuff, and you have to make sure you know where everything is. So our inventory people are really important. And they are all taking in information, not only at their consoles, but also from a lot of other engineering sources in Houston, but then around the world as well. They go through a rigorous training process to get ready to go do that job. And it's not the same people in mission control all the time. There's actually about 30 to 35% of our time is spent in mission control, actually flying the mission. And then the other 65 to 70% of our time is spent back in the office preparing for the next mission or doing some of that training so that we can be ready for that next mission. So to kind of show you how that lays out, it's a real similar project management style or project management structure that you might be familiar with, where you have program managers that define what a mission will look like. They or any other type of project, they'll give you requirements, and they're your customers. They're the people that you want to provide success to. And you also have, for us in mission control, it's not only the flight director on console that is in charge of the mission as it's happening, but then you also have another flight director that is in charge of the overall space station mission, not just for the 9 hours of a single shift, but for months and weeks and months at a time, because the space station is just one long continuous mission. And then you have the pyramid in the middle where all the real-time work is happening, and that's where in the flight control room itself, and you have all those flight controllers that are monitoring their systems, but they're not just looking at things from their perspective. That's part of their job, but the other part of their job is to know what the entire mission needs to be like, and listening to the other flight controllers, to what's happening in their systems, and integrating this big picture together. So everybody in that room is doing an integration job, but looking at it from the perspective of their system. And then you're funneling all that information to the flight director. And then the flight director is the person that has the actual ultimate authority and responsibility for the success of the mission. And that setup is the same in all 5 mission control rooms that support the space station. But of course, you can't have 5 flight directors in charge of the mission. You have to have one person that's got the overall authority and responsibility. So while the Japanese flight director is responsible for the Japanese laboratory, the European flight director is responsible for the European laboratory, the Russian flight director for the Russian modules, and the NASA flight director is responsible for the US elements of the space station. You need that flight director that's in charge of the whole thing. And that is also the NASA flight director. So when I sit in mission control for the space station, or whichever flight director is on console right now, they have two roles. One is make sure that everything is working the way it should in the US elements of the space station, but then also overall safety of the space station itself. And so the flight director has a pretty clear set of job description, and it's to take any action necessary for crew safety and mission success. So crew safety is always our #1 priority, and there's no higher authority than the flight director. We like to joke that the President of the United States can call and say that they want something done, but if the flight director doesn't think it's the best or safe thing to do, then we actually have the authority to not do what we're told to do in that respect. Of course, we might have to go have a conversation in the hallway to explain ourselves, but we are the highest authority when it comes to executing the spaceflight missions. And having that chain of command is really important when it comes to the thing that we worry about most, which is crew safety. And the way we manage that is through all the risks that are involved in human spaceflight, because it is a very risky business. But we're not doing it ourselves, we're not doing it alone. Not only as a flight director do I have all those flight controllers, but I also have access to all of the offline and non-real-time support people that make up the foundation of what we're doing. And that's how you get your mission ready to go. Those are the people that have expertise in very specific areas. A lot of engineering support lives in that realm as well. So how do we get ready to go actually fly a mission? And there are a lot of words here, and I'm not going to try to go into great detail on everything, but we take an approach that we call plan, train, fly. But really the big important thing is that you see all of these words and all of these boxes are inside a big blue bubble called lessons learned. And we have 60 years experience of flying humans safely in space, and we have three incidents where we've lost crew members because of not paying attention to these tenets. And so we know that these are the things that we need to do to safely be successful getting humans off planet and keeping them safe. And that big thing is the lessons learned. So everything we do, we're constantly asking what lessons have we learned through the process, so that we can either repeat them if they're good lessons, or we can change things if they didn't go the way we had planned. And so I'm right now involved in development of the Lunar Gateway, which is going to be a small space station that's going to be in lunar orbit, and it's going to be a way station, if you will, not only to the moon, but then also eventually to Mars. And so Orion, the capsule, will come to the gateway. The lander will be, the lunar lander will be parked at the gateway waiting for them. The crew will be on the gateway as the space station, getting ready for their lunar mission. They'll go down to the surface, spend a period of time there, come back up to the gateway, and then jump into the Orion and come home. And then eventually, with respect to Mars, instead of going to the surface of the moon, you would get into your Mars transport and head on out to Mars. So Gateway is the new thing. We're hoping to launch the first elements of it in the 2023-2024 timeframe. Right now, we're at the very left-hand side of this page. We're getting our requirements, our objectives. What do we want the spacecraft to do? And as we get into that, we're starting to look at, have we flown something like this before? What new training do we need to have? We don't have a lot of experience with solar electric propulsion on human spacecraft yet. We need to really understand that. As we're working through all of these early processes, we're constantly talking to the Gateway program about things that might work, things from our experience base, make suggested changes, and really want to make sure that this is a spacecraft that can be operable by the crew and from the flight controllers from the ground. Now, as we do all those things, plan, train, and fly, like I said, we've been really successful. But it's not because we've been lucky, it's because we've really put a mindful approach into how we do things. And if you go and look at the area of study of high performing and high reliability teams, mission control is both of those things. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what that is, because I think it's something that you as an engineer or as a team leader, you don't have to be at a nuclear power plant or at air traffic control or in mission control to put these things into effect and make your team not only more successful, but also more nimble and more capable. So if you first talk about high performing organizations, there's actually 5 things that make up an HPO. And so what is a high performing organization? And that's an organization that achieves financial and non-financial results that are better than those of its peer group over a period of time of at least 5 to 10 years. In other words, high-performing organizations do good stuff faster and better than its peers. For us, that doesn't mean profit. It means we're very, very good at human spaceflight operations. But why are we good? And how do we get there? And how do we stay there? So let's talk about the aspects of high-performing organizations and how we do it in mission control. So the first 3 are, as you can see, are leadership, design, and people. So we want to make sure our leadership is aligned and effective. Like I said, we have this really crystal clear chain of command and mission control, not only here in Houston, but then across all of our international partners. So we always know who the authority is. But we don't just stop at that level. We push leadership down to the lowest of levels. We teach leadership as soon as you come into working in flight operations. We have this theme called Lead Your Leader. I recognize as a flight director, I'm not the smartest person on the power system. I expect my power system flight controller to lead me to understanding what a particular problem might be. I expect them to be the experts. And of course, communication is a key aspect, and you'll see that a lot. You have to be able to communicate. And communicate doesn't mean talking. It doesn't mean just sending an email. We term it information push and information pull. We want to make sure information is provided, but at the same time, we have to realize when we need information, and so we ask questions. Or if we push information in an email, we follow up to make sure that it's actually been received and understood. And you do that at every level. By our design, we have a pretty lean structure that is focused on our strategic and tactical things that we're working on. We document as much as we can. So our processes, our training flows, our certification guides, but they're not a thing in and of themselves. They're a way for us to get to our end goal. And that means we have to be able to change them on a regular basis when our goals change. Gateway and the Artemis program is a brand new thing. It's leveraging heritage, but we're doing it in a new way. And so we need to be able to change along with that. People are obviously key, and that is a powerful element. And you have to have a way of not only attracting people, but also retaining the most capable of people. NASA has a great brand, a great name, and everybody pretty much knows what NASA is all about. But if you want to come work for NASA, especially in mission control, it's more than just submitting a resume. Recruiting is pretty selective. You go through as a boot camp, really understand our culture, what's important. We teach you about Lead Your Leader. We teach you about the responsibilities you have as a flight controller, how making a mistake could lead to the loss of crew lives. And then after boot camp, you go through more complex and more rigorous training, make sure you have all the skill sets. And of course, there are tests, evaluations along the way. You have to pass in order to get certified to work in mission control. We also focus on change management and our culture. And I've touched on these a little bit already. We are a large organization, and we still have to be able to change and adapt as things change, as the government changes perspectives, as we get new missions. And so that has to be a balance, though. We can't be so nimble that we give up on some of the core foundations of flight operations that have made us successful and that have enabled us to protect the astronauts and the spacecraft and the missions themselves. And this includes something that we call next worst failure planning. And that is where we have a culture where we don't just think about what happens if something breaks, but we spend a lot of time focusing on what happens if, while something is broken, the next most important thing is broken, and how do we respond to it? And that is a very complex task, and it can get very nebulous. So a quick example, the space station has 2 primary cooling loops outside of the space station. You cannot connect the 2 together, and each of them has a single pump that is running continuously. If one pump fails, you lose half your ability to get the heat removed from the space station. And rejecting heat is a big thing that you always have to do with your spacecraft. So we have procedures to respond to a failure of a pump. It's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty simple task. It takes a couple days to respond to. But we don't stop there. We worry a lot about what happens if that other pump fails and we have complete loss of cooling. And so we actually have a lot of different materials at the ready to respond to that double failure if it were to happen. The pump that fails, the power system that fails, the data connectivity that fails, and so it gets really complicated when you try to cover everything. But that's just part of our culture, so that we're always ready. And that jumps down to the next part, is culture and how we are actively engaged in our culture. We don't let it just shape itself. We don't let it just see what happens. We actively nurture our culture, and we have a lot of lessons learned over the last 60 years, and we tweak them as we go because we have to adapt. But we call them the stone tablets of flight control, the foundations of flight operations, plan, train, fly that we talked about, doing lessons learned. All of those are part of our culture, and we're constantly engaged in that culture. So let me give you a quick example and of how this went into play for me. And that was with the HTV mission. HTV number 3 had a failure where it was trying to leave the space station. So it's only about 10 meters below the space station, and it started drifting back up in towards the space station instead of down and away like it was supposed to. And for us to be successful with the next mission, which was mine, HTV-4, I was told that you've got 9 months to figure out what happened and figure out why it did what it did and make sure it doesn't happen again, because we can't put the space station at risk. And so that involved teams in the space station program, engineering, flight operations, Canada, Japan. We all had to engage on this problem. And it turned out that we were able to realize that our kinematics were not set up very well to make it a simple process of just releasing the HTV cargo module. In this case, it stuck on just a little bit, and it pulled it up towards the space station. We were able to replicate it, do a bunch of engineering analysis, and determine that the best path forward was to just make no changes, except we needed to wait a little bit longer. So when the space station arm releases the grapple fixture, we tend to move the arm away as fast as as soon as we can, because we want to make sure it stays clear. Well, that doesn't allow enough time for the HTV to actually itself fully move out of the arm, and because of the orbital mechanics, we actually the HTV bumped the inside of the arm, which caused all these problems. So we just added a minute of waiting and let the HTV move through physics away from the space station, and that resolved the problem. It sounds really simple, but it took a lot of integrated work by a whole bunch of teams that were all high performing, working on their own to come to this conclusion that allowed me to integrate everything together, take the recommendation forward, and have the mission go off successfully. The other thing I want to touch on quickly is high reliability organizations. So a high reliability organization is one that has succeeded in avoiding catastrophes in an environment where normal accidents can be expected due to risk factors and complexity. And being a high performing organization is good, but being good doesn't mean you get it right all the time or that you do it safely. But a high reliability organization has a tendency to do things safely and manage risk effectively. But being a high reliability organization can involve expensive, rare assets where human lives are directly impacted, which obviously is our situation, where astronauts in a tin can in a vacuum is very high stakes. And so we want to be a high reliability organization, but not so much so that we can't actually get the mission accomplished. So again, 5 characteristics: preoccupation with failure, reluctance to simplify, sensitivity to operations. Those are all things you do in advance, but then things still happen. And how do you respond to them? And so you have a commitment to resilience and deference to expertise. So I want to show you these a little bit with a quick story. And I know that I want to make sure we have time for questions as well. So I'll just hit this one at a high level, but it's kind of a fun story because one day, one of the Russian cosmonauts called down and said, "Houston, it's snowing outside. Is it supposed to be snowing?" And the answer is no, it tends not to snow in space. Something must be going on. And it turned out that one of the cooling loops that cools the batteries for one of our big solar arrays was leaking. And it was leaking ammonia. And the ammonia was crystallizing, and the snow was actually ammonia crystals. And you have to have your batteries cooled or they're not going to work. And we can't afford to lose any of those 8 power channels. And so we decided we needed to go do a spacewalk and replace that pump. And normally it takes about a year to prepare to go do a spacewalk. All the planning, all the training, making sure that everything is ready to go. You have to prepare the airlock, you have to prepare the spacesuits, you have to train the ground teams and the crew. We have some things like that big pump that I was talking about earlier, because they're so important, we can go outside and go do a spacewalk or an EVA in about 9 days. But this particular pump that was leaking is called a PFCS, Pump Flow Control Subassembly. That was not one of these critical tasks. So we were not in the posture of being ready to go outside in 9 days. But our program said, you need to go outside in 2 days. And the reason for that is because we wanted to see if we could get out there while it was still leaking, so we knew where the leak was coming from. And 3 of our 6 crew members were coming home in 5 days in a Soyuz. So we really needed to get the spacewalk done first. We had never done that before. I got the phone call when I was at home. It's like, we need you to come in right now and start leading the team to go get this done. Doing a spacewalk is the most dangerous thing that we do in human spaceflight outside of putting people on a rocket or coming through the atmosphere. And so you have to ask, even though we were successful in doing the spacewalk and solving the problem, did we just get lucky? And there are a lot of schools of thought on this. And the 2 leading ones, the ETTO and also the drift into failure, both say we should have had an accident. And the efficiency thoroughness trade-off is that the less time you give yourself to do your normal processes, the more likely it is you're going to have errors. And that, I think that just makes sense. So the more rushed you are, the more likely you are to have problems. The drift into failure says that when you have a whole bunch of people working on the same problem and using their processes, the faster you try to go, you're not going to talk across your stovepipes or across your matrices. You'll make decisions in your teams that make sense, but from a big picture perspective, it's not going to work. And we're certainly at risk for that because we have a lot of teams working really hard and fast to get the spacewalk done. So why didn't we have an accident? And that's because we went into it being mindful right up front that this is a risk that we need to manage and that anybody can stop it at any time. And we need to be fully aware of what we're doing. We have to be aware of our circumstances, our processes, and our culture. We put all those things into play, and you can see that all the elements of the high reliability organization fall into that. So the circumstances. This pump spacewalk was going to be spacewalk number 21. We had 3 spacewalks leading, in the past 6 to 9 months, previous 6 to 9 months that set us up. I was the lead flight director for EVA or spacewalks 18 and 19. Number 19 was actually a contingency spacewalk as well. We had trouble installing a power distribution box. Spacewalk number 20 was one that was out at the same location, near the same location as our problematic pump, using the same type of interfaces that our spacewalk to fix the leaking, the snow was going to utilize. So over those period of months, we had a lot of experience doing this type of event. And many of the flight controllers involved had worked those same spacewalks. The 2 astronauts that we were going to send outside had already worked together on STS-127, a shuttle mission, at the very same work site. We didn't have to train them on how to get there or what the risks were out at that location. We told them, you're going out to this spot. They both knew how to get there. They remembered how to work together as a team to get there. There's a lot of training we didn't have to do because our circumstances were such that the right people were on board. There was only one thing we could do. We could replace the pump. It may not be what's leaking. It could have been a line that was leaking, but the only thing we could easily do was replace the pump. So we had one mission to fix the pump, and that was it. So it was very clear from the program on what our requirements were. We already had all the technical details. So a lot of the circumstances set us up for success. Matrix management. It can be a hard thing, except when it's not. You have to have diversity of mental models. You need to have people thinking about the same problem in different ways. You just have to be careful they're not thinking about them in different ways all by themselves. You need to make sure that your big team is coming together to talk about major milestones and their approaches to things so that everybody understands decisions that are being made and the rationale behind it. And because we have leadership as a big emphasis, I don't have to go to every single meeting. I can go to these larger meetings, and I can rely on all these different teams to build up their part of the puzzle, present it to all of us, and then we can ask those larger questions to make sure that everybody has considered the big picture and that the whole story is coming together. And so everybody is working at various levels of integration across every part of the project. And then again, our culture. Our culture is one where we actively tell people it's okay to be wrong. And we also talk about experts that make mistakes and interns or co-ops that make big saves. You know, the new person who comes in the week one and asks, why is this a certain way? Everybody else has accepted that that's just the way it is. Nobody had really thought to go look at why it's actually set up the way it is. And that simple question, once you're empowered to ask it, could make a big significant change. This is an all-in event, and we have managers that are happy to take a secondary role. They made sure that their people were engaged and they let the experts do their jobs. And that meant that people were hungry and they didn't have time to go get lunch. And so you had the bosses going out, bringing in food and keeping everybody engaged, but then also watching out for the health and safety of their team and making sure that people are taking breaks. And it's okay to, part of our culture is it's okay to ask questions even when you might be wrong. And you might have to backtrack a little bit to explain why you made decisions and it turns out that was the right decision. But that re-asking, that squeaky wheel mentality is really important. Again, it's a dangerous thing that we're trying to do. And our number one task is to get the crew back inside alive, even if that means we end up not sending them out. Okay, we were successful. We replaced the pump and that stopped the leak. Could we do another 2-day spacewalk? We could, but it's not because we can say, well, we did it once before, we'll do it again. So we've actually done another 2-day spacewalk to replace a computer, but we started at the very beginning. What are the circumstances? What are the processes? What about our culture? Is everything lined up so that we could do it? We start that process from the very beginning. You can't skip the step and just assume that because it worked before, it can work again. Can you be a high-performing and high-reliability organization? Absolutely. I think Mission Control is a great model of where that shows. But it's an unstable equilibrium. You have to remain focused on it. You have to always be stepping back, looking at your processes, making sure that you're still focused. You have to be careful not to rely on things working before. That means you'll be successful again. And continuous improvement has to be a way of life. You're always trying to learn lessons. And it's not just after something fails that you go back and have an after-action discussion. It's even when things are successful that you're constantly talking about why were they successful and how could you make them even more successful next time. And that's the material I brought with me today. It's really exciting to talk to you about Mission Control, a little bit about what it's like, how we do it, things to consider as you move forward in your engineering careers, or project management, or team leadership. And again, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you guys ask me some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ed, for that presentation. It was a very in-depth understanding, especially the view that you gave us from the inside the mission control room, the overview of the IS International Space Station, as well as the organization. So I think we did get to learn a lot about why we are so successful and the reason why we are able to perform at this consistency. So thank you so much for that presentation. We do have a lot of questions in the question answers box, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to compile those questions and try to frame it to you so that we will try to achieve and answer most of the participants the questions that they have asked. So let me shoot the first question to you, and many of the participants are very excited to be here and they want to be where you are. You know, they want to be at your position. So the basic question that they want to ask you is, what is it that motivated you to be the flight director at NASA? What is the people you looked up for inspiration, and what message you want to give to the today's youth that they could achieve this also?
Wow, that is a fantastic question, and something I'm really passionate about, not because of my own anything I've done, but just it's so fun to talk about, because for me, the way it all happened, it certainly wasn't luck. It's definitely something that I chased after with purpose, but I developed a passion for it. And like I said, I was really young, and it doesn't with when Challenger happened, and it just sparked this curiosity of why did humans want to fly in a machine, and what happened to the machine. And as I learned more about it, learned about the engineers that created the machine, and there's just so many people involved, and I decided I really wanted to be involved in this great exploration adventure to put people outside of Earth's atmosphere and to go. And of course, I was influenced by Star Trek and Space Camp, but that is really, I think, the key part is you find something that you're passionate or excited about, and then you need to just not let that stuff happen around you, but then also look for ways to engage in it, to learn more about it, and to ask the question that you're asking: how did people get involved in that particular line of work? For me, it meant learning that I needed to get an advanced degree in math or science or engineering, to study hard, and then also develop those leadership and teamwork skills so that I could communicate well. And so a focus you'll hear continually from me is learning. I was always pursuing learning something new, and I enjoy a challenge. And if it's not challenging, I want to find the next big challenge, the next thing that I can work on. And the other part of your question is mentorship. You know, you really can't do things alone. You can, but for one thing, it's not as fun, and for another thing, you won't get as much out of it. And so you're looking to surround yourself with mentors that can help you, and not just mentors, but also people in powers in positions of power, people that are enabled to be able to help you. And sometimes those people may not be interested in helping you. You might know that I need to go talk to this person, or I need to get approval or a signature or whatever it is from this particular individual, and they may not be interested in you at the beginning. And so that's another thing. None of this came easy for me. I had to work really hard, and a lot of times I was told no initially, and so that I could have just walked away, but because I was passionate about it and I really wanted to go do it, I either found alternate ways, or I found what I needed to do to really prove to an individual that I had earned their signature or their respect, or to be on their team so that I could gain what I needed to. So it's definitely something you need to work hard to pursue. Be a little bit tenacious, and don't always take no as the final answer. No may just mean not able to do it the way you thought you would. You might have to find another way. But the key thing is to find something you love doing and make a career out of it, because otherwise it's just a job.
Yeah, so be persistent. I suppose that's the message, that don't give up and just keep pursuing, and don't stop for it. The next question that we did get from a lot of participants is that it's great to have success in life. We all want to achieve that, but we know the true learning that happens is from the failures. So the general question that was put up was, can you say about any difficult times that you faced, an emergency situation or something that was not a failure but a stressful time, and how did you manage it, or what was your learning from that?
Yeah, that's an absolutely accurate point. You learn a lot of things. Take school, for example. You're learning a lot of things through textbooks, and you're learning from professors, and you're taking tests, and you get a lot of book smarts, and you walk away with a degree, and you think that you've got it all understood. And then you go to the workplace, you get that very first job assignment, and all of a sudden you realize you don't necessarily know everything you need to know to accomplish that task. And that can be really frustrating, or you might even have bigger problems where something doesn't work the way you want it to. And that is absolutely how life goes and how careers go. It's true for me too. A lot of the things I've talked to you about is not only because it's been taught to me, but it's also some things that I've lived through and experienced. My very first week on console as a certified flight director, we spend a lot of time so I was a flight controller for a long period of time. I got a lot of experience doing that before I became a flight director. We spend about 6 months in training to be a flight director. We spend a good number of hours in simulations being a flight director, getting the team to work through some really hard challenges. But all that time, you still have people helping you, and you have access to mentors, and you get certified. Everybody comes in and congratulates you. You get a nice pin that you can wear on your lapel, and everybody leaves. And you are in charge of a very, very expensive, one-of-a-kind asset in low Earth orbit going 28,000 kilometers per hour with 6 lives on it. If something happens or something breaks, it's your authority, your responsibility. So it's very nerve-wracking. The first week I was on console, one of our power control modules for one of those 8 power channels failed. And we have this thing called a caution and warning summary, and it lights up with different colors when something bad happens. And so this yellow message shows up on the board. I've never seen it before. And it says that this thing has failed, this controller unit. And all my training did not prepare me for that particular instance. But that's okay. I relied on my general training of how to respond to situations like this, and I had a great team around me. And that team, the power specialist in this case, turned around, looked at me and said, "Flight, we've had this problem. Here's what we need to do." And effectively he said that he will lead the team, and I just need to double check him. So that lead your leader, that is really important. And so that's where I've really come to realize the importance of having a very strong team. And now in my leadership position, I really work hard to make sure that is something that we continue to instill in our flight controllers. I also talked about how dangerous spacewalks can be. And I mentioned how I led a spacewalk number 18 and 19. And things didn't go very well on number 18. There was a power distribution box we were trying to replace. It wasn't going well. We normally plan for spacewalks to be 6.5 hours long. This one was almost 8 hours long, and we still were not getting things done. And I had trained with my crew members a lot on the ground. And so I knew what it sounded like when they got tired. And I could tell there was a certain point where they were just no longer able to be operating at the level we needed them to be at. It was time to call the spacewalk off and bring them back inside. And you start to get to that edge of performance where it's not any longer about the hardware. It's about making sure you keep the crew safe and alive. And we got really close to that. We were way far away from where their actual lives were in danger, but it was at the point where I had to make the decision that we needed to turn around and get them inside to ensure that they would be safe. So that was a big learning moment for me to really come up to that point and work through it. And again, you rely on your training and your team to help you get through that.
Thank you, Ed, for that answer. The next question that a lot of participants have put up is maybe not in the technical manner, but at least the future from NASA side? What are the plans that you look out? What is the vision that you have in terms of the International Space Station, as well as new launches, and maybe even touching something called as the space debris? A lot of discussion has been done in those matters. What is your insight about it?
It is an awesome time to be involved in human spaceflight and spaceflight in general. The commercial companies that are now seeing a profitable reason to get involved in spaceflight, not only with launching humans into space, but then also you see more and more companies getting involved in tourism, not just taking up NASA astronauts to work on the space station, but actually having hotels in space and tourist destinations in space is a new emerging field. You have a lot more commercial companies around the world, not just in the United States, that are involved in launching things into space, from small satellites, large satellites, different platforms. We're now working on things about refueling satellites in geosynchronous orbit, which means remote robotics. And so the opportunities to be involved used to be, you had to be involved with government agencies, government space programs. That's gone away. You can be involved in this wide-ranging, very new commercial market, in not just even as an engineer. These tourist companies need people that work on the tourism side. So there's just tons and tons of ways to be involved here on Earth, around the planet, in getting people and new technologies off the surface, not only for Earth orbit or Earth support, but now also out around the moon. Moon's a big focus, not only for NASA, but really for all the international partnerships that we have to go explore more about the moon, learn more about it, and then eventually put, in the very near term, put people back on the surface of the moon, not just to plant a flag, bring home a couple rocks and say, hey, we went back again, but to actually learn more about the moon and then exploit the moon and its resources to help and do research for back here on Earth, but then also to help further our goals. So NASA's approach to this is the way the government should be involved in these grand adventures is invest our government dollars in things that companies don't want to invest in. Going out to the moon right now, putting a space station around the moon, there's not really a profit in doing that yet. The companies can see potential, but it's not worth investing corporate money yet. So the government is investing in that research and development, getting the foothold out there, if you will. We've been doing the same thing in low Earth orbit, but not to say it's simple or easy or risk-free, but we've learned how to do it. And we've learned how to do it so much that companies are now realizing that they can make a profit off of doing it, which means there's more opportunity and it's easier access if government gets out of the way. So that's what we're trying to do, is get out of the way of low Earth orbit, go put our focus beyond Earth orbit. Eventually we want to put boots on Mars, but going direct to Mars is too big a step to just do all at once, both for human physiology and for technology. So we're using the moon as a stepping stone to get ready to go to Mars. And so that's where we're putting more and more of our focus, enabling the low Earth orbit environment to be open to, like I was saying, a whole lot of different organizations. But it gets to the other part of your question. The more stuff you put in space, especially low, responsible and careful in how you do it, you make a big mess. And unfortunately, the early years of spaceflight in low Earth orbit didn't really pay as much mindfulness to that. There's big sky theory. Space is really big, so I don't need to worry about it. I think we've done the same thing with our own planet when we make landfills and dump garbage into the oceans, and hey, the oceans are big, we don't need to worry about it. And now years later, we've learned that maybe that wasn't the wisest choice. That's where we are now with low Earth orbit and the debris environment. We shed a lot of things off rockets when we put things into space. We throw garbage away, and it used to be that you just do this without really thinking about it. And now, at least the space agencies that are involved with the space station, we're very mindful in the things that we deploy or throw away from the space station to make sure that they always go on trajectories that burn up in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a great incinerator for all of our garbage, and so we send a lot of it down that way. the other side of things is that we have a lot of satellites and other things in space that we want to be there, but they get old. And what do you do with them? In geosynchronous orbit, they actually have disposal areas now where they will send satellites to go, and basically they're no longer useful, so they just sit there for years and years and years. But you have propellant tanks and other pressurized tanks that might rupture over time, and that just creates more debris. We have, like it or not, and I don't like it, space is an environment where countries can exploit for non-peaceful purposes. And so we see countries doing testing of anti-satellite technologies, for example, and that provides a lot more space debris because that stuff does not come raining back down through the atmosphere as much as it shows up in the movies. So it is very much something that we are struggling with. It's one of the highest risks for the International Space Station. It's a city block in space, and the energies involved for any of those collisions, a very small piece can potentially do a lot of harm to the space station.
So the future does look very bright, but we have to learn from our past and the mistakes that we have made and see that we don't repeat them in the future. The next question, a bit on the lighter side, when you speak about space, astronauts are the first thing that do come to your mind. So a lot of questions have been asked about how is your relationship with the astronauts as a flight director? How do you communicate with them, your interactions with them? And have you applied ever for an astronaut?
I'll start with the last question because it's the easiest. I know it doesn't look like I have bad vision, but since I was 6 or 7 years old, I've been wearing glasses or contacts or things like that. So my whole life, I've never been qualified to be an astronaut. So I think I knew really early on that it would never be an option. And so, no, I've never really pursued it. And now that I'm on the side of training the astronauts and I know what they go through to go fly as a government astronaut, a NASA astronaut, and all the research they have to do on themselves while they're in space, I don't know that I would really want to be an astronaut. You offer me a flight as a tourist, I will go in a heartbeat. And the vehicles we use to fly people into space are safe and reliable. I would fly on any of them. I would go for 6 months, no problem. But I don't know if I'd want to work for NASA or any of the other governments that have astronauts on the space station, because they work really hard and they sacrifice a lot to be able to go do that. We do get to know them really well. So it's a benefit. The astronauts live here in Houston. They train here. And that's why part of our culture is pretty easy to teach here. That's harder at the other control centers, where you have to realize that it's not a video game, that it is real human beings that you're dealing with on the space station. And it's easier to do that when you can go out and train the astronauts themselves in the mock-ups or in the simulators. I moved a few years ago, but before we moved, my backyard neighbor was Sunny Williams. She's one of the astronauts. And so you really do get this personal bond. And it's really important for flight directors to really get to know the crew members that you're working with. And like I touched on a little bit with the spacewalk story, but it's also true when I was the lead for Expeditions 28 and 41. You get to know, you purposefully spend time getting to know the astronauts so that you know what it sounds like when they're tired, or when they're grumpy, or when they're happy, so that you can be ready to help resolve the situation. Living in a tin can for 6 months at a time with only maybe 2, 3, 5 other people can be really hard sometimes. And I can be one of a few people that can hear a tone of voice change just a little bit. And I can tell the flight director that's running the shift, hey, they're having a rough day. Let's just back off a little bit, give them some space. Don't say anything, but just ease up a little bit. And then you'll have a better crew member tomorrow. So it's really important to have those relationships. And it's also really, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's really, really awesome to be able to have friends that are astronauts. And they have internet protocol, so a voice over IP phone on the space station. And when you're the lead flight director, they call you all the time. sometimes in the middle of the night because they are on Greenwich Mean Time and I'm not. And so that can be, when it's part of your job, it can be kind of annoying sometimes to be woken up in the middle of the night. But at the same time, when you look at caller ID and it says space station, I'll admit it's pretty cool.
True. So it is much more than just mission. There is emotions involved, there are people involved, and we need to be very aware of that. Another question that was very interesting that was shot out was the zero gravity experience that you've had, 90 minutes. So can you tell us about that experience? How was it and how did it come about?
Yeah, so 90 minutes happened over the course of about 650 parabolas on an airplane. And, so just like riding a roller coaster or anything, if I do the parabola here in the screen, you go up, and then as you're going over, it's like you're in an elevator. When the elevator starts to drop, you get a very brief moment of zero gravity, or you go over the hill of a roller coaster, you get a really brief moment where you're floating in your seat. Well, the airplane does the same thing. It gets to the top, and then it doesn't dive down. It really just configures itself to where it falls down for about 25 seconds. And so you drop about 10,000 feet in 20 or 25 seconds. And so you're weightless and you do tasks in zero gravity for 20 or 25 seconds, but energy is conserved. Everything else is conserved. And if you're doing zero gravity, the plane's got to pull out. Well, the plane better pull out or you'll have other problems. And that pull out is a 2G pull out. So you do 0Gs, 2Gs, 0G, 2G, and you'll do about 10 of those, and then the airplane will turn around and fly back. So it's back and forth. About 40 or 50 parabolas per flight. And so I don't know exactly how many airplane flights I did to get up that number. But it's only 25. So 90 minutes is one orbit around the Earth for the space station. And it took me, to get to 90 minutes, 25 seconds at a time. It feels great, except when it doesn't. And if you get sick on roller coasters, you're probably going to get sick on the airplane. And that's why they call the airplane the vomit comet. And so there's medications they provide. And for me, I was younger then. I didn't get sick except for a couple of flights. So it was pretty good for me. How did it come about? So we talked about carbon nanotubes at the beginning and carbon flight. So that project that I put together was to actually go create nanotubes in a zero gravity environment with a college program that NASA did, where college students could put programs on their zero gravity airplane. We did the research, we made the proposal, we got accepted, we flew for 2 years actually, a week long over twice. And then that second year, we were actually the first ones in the world to create nanotubes in a zero gravity environment. And now they fly nanotubes to the space station, but they still don't make them up there. So we're still the only ones to make zero gravity nanotubes. But that opportunity then spawned, then I became a valuable resource at the university, because the university does research for spaceflight missions. And I was certified to fly on this airplane. So the university had me go fly some of their research before it flew on the space shuttle. And so I got more opportunities from there. I've done soldering in zero gravity to make sure we understand how those processes work. So lots of great opportunities, but 600 plus parabolas to get to 90 minutes.
Oh, that really sounds fun. And I'm sure it's been a great experience for you. I know there are a lot of questions that have been put up by the participants, but apologies if your questions was not as part of the ones that I could compile. We are constrained with time, and so we want to end the question answer session for now. And I have posted a link for the last slide that Mr. Head had put up in his presentation. So any further information, the YouTube videos that you want to watch, you could watch it through those links. They are available. The link is into the chat box. And wow, so Mr. Ed, thank you so much for your time, your effort. It's been early in the morning. I know it's just the start of the day, but you have really given us so much information that we know that we can build on that. We can learn more from it. It's been an inspiring session, and I'm sure the participants have enjoyed it. So I want to thank you from the entire university at UPES, all the people who have been able to manage this, especially the Dean of our School of Engineering, Dr. Kamal Bansal, the head of the department, Dr. Sudhir Joshi, who was the one who communicated with you, and Dr. Om Prakash, who has been helped us in the logistics and getting the permissions from NASA. So I want to thank for your time. We want to thank each and every member who has been a part of this, organizing this webinar. Thank you so much for your support, and mostly to the participants, the students from all across the country. We also have few, I think, out of India who have participated. So it's thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being a part of this webinar. We hope that you have had a good session. You have learned something from this, and we encourage you to go ahead, look up, and never stop learning, and have that passion to keep on going. So thank you so much. Stay safe. And thank you once again, Mr. Ed, for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to join you, and to UPES and everybody there that put this all together. It was my pleasure, and I'm sure you can tell from my voice, it's just so much fun to talk about what we do and provide maybe just a little bit of insight into how people can learn from the things that we're doing, whether it's in this field or some other field. You know, I just love the opportunity, and I really appreciate you and everybody on the team that helped enable this to happen.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll definitely continue this relationship even in the future, and wishing all the best to all your missions in the future.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.